Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. Today, we have a pretty cool episode. We are doing another top 4 breakdown. Now, for anyone not familiar with the tournament over this weekend, we had a new series of tournaments come about. They are called Ka0s at the Nexus. And for those who have noticed the spelling of these tournaments, K-A-O-S, referring to Ka0s, the individual on Discord. Ka0s is, I believe, a mod on the Nexus. They were at one point. I'm not sure if they still are. Someone I became very familiar with over quarantine due to the fact that we were both moderators on the cEDH Nexus, and someone I spent a lot of time with. Very fun person. Super happy that they are running these tournaments. It's awesome to just have a larger tournament scene for cEDH going at all times, and prizes have been pretty cool, and the turnout for these tournaments has been pretty sweet. So without any further ado, let's jump into the top 4. We're going to break down the top 4 of this event, talk about the decks that were played, and talk about the decks that won. All right, everybody, if you like videos like this, make sure to hit like and subscribe. It helps the YouTube algorithm know that you like this content. Make sure to hit that little bell icon so you can be notified whenever I come out with new videos. And if you're feeling extra generous, feel free to go check out my Patreon at patreon.com/comedianmtg. It helps me allow to come to events like I'm going to be in CF Richmond this week and stuff like that. So there's going to be a lot of really cool stuff happening, and a lot of it's due to the support from people like you over on Patreon. So thank you very much. Plus, you get some pretty cool perks like a private Discord channel, and people get their name at the end of the show notes. All right, let's break down this tournament. Cool thing about these Ka0s tournaments is that actually they put all their deck lists on here on Moxfield. So the top 16 lists are all here. I wanted to throw some quick shout outs before we break down the top 4 of this event. First shout out is to the 5th place deck Yisan Bard Rock Cafe variant. This list actually went undefeated during the Swiss rounds, but unfortunately didn't win the semifinals round. So that was pretty cool to see Yisan to have such a stellar performance during the Swiss. This Thrasios Bruce Taro list over here, the one that got in 7th place, got to the semifinals but didn't make it to the finals, was actually the one that was my friend Justin, who, if you watch my last video about our local 40-person Massachusetts cEDH tournament, the one I played in the finals playing Dawn Waker against me, that's him. So congrats on putting up another result so quickly, one after the other. Of course, I got to shout out the fact that 2 Winota decks made the top 16. That's pretty cool. And the last shout out is to Kolkio. So if you know Kolkio, he is pretty big in the Danish scene. He helped with Tier 1 Con last year, and he won several Danish tournaments over the past few years and had a very solid showing, I believe top 4 Tier 1 Con itself. So Kolkio is a very good player. He actually also went undefeated during the Swiss as far as I was alerted, but unfortunately had a conflict and couldn't make it. So who knows what would happen if he actually got into that top 16. Moving on. In 4th place here, playing Timna Halana, is actually my good friend Gustav. So if you remember way back in the first Playing with Power tournament, I said that Gustav would continue to keep putting up top 4 placements, and he has not let me down. He won the most recent Playing with Power tournament, and here he is top 4ing another event, top 4 in this Ka0s of the Nexus event. This is Timna Halana. This is a deck that Gustav has actually been working on quite a lot. We literally had been talking about this deck maybe a week ago, just talking about how the deck is looking right now, updating it to be as optimal and as ready to go as possible for the current meta. So let's break it down. Timna Halana is a Protean Hulk list. So the whole point is to sacrifice Protean Hulk and be able to pull out a pile of creatures that will kill your opponents. The pile of choice is, I believe, grab Karmic Guide and a sack outlet first, so either Carrion Feeder and Viscera Seer. Then the second pile would probably be, if I'm not mistaken, you get Safi and Body Snatcher. Body Snatcher brings back the Protean Hulk. And then, so I believe at the pile I just mentioned, you can start looping them. There's a bunch of different ways to mention it, but basically what's going to happen is with a combination of Safi, Karmic Guide, Body Launderer, and Body Snatcher. Body Snatcher is the only one that exiles itself, but basically a combination of all these cards, and either Corpse Knight or Zulaport Cutthroat will be your outlet. You'll have an infinite death loop going, and either they drain from Zulaport Cutthroat, or whenever they come into the battlefield, Corpse Knight will ping your opponents. So some combination of those cards will end up killing your opponents. I'm not sure what Gustav's default pile was, but that's the basic idea of it. The cool thing about Halana in the command zone, and the reason to play this card, is that one, it's actually really solid board control, because it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2. When you do, that creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature. So it's better than a fight ability in the fact that, say you play your Timna, you can pay an extra 2 and have it do 2 damage to a creature on the battlefield. Timna doesn't take any damage, but it does 2 damage damage without having to suffer any damage itself. The cool thing is, with Protean Hulk, when that enters the battlefield, you can pay 2 and have it deal 6 damage to itself, and therefore it sacrifices itself. Basically, it doesn't sacrifice, but it deals the damage to itself, and therefore it's a way to have Protean Hulk kill itself in the command zone, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of the reasoning behind Halana, and then as opposed to other commanders which are better at sacrificing, Halana also just gives you the added value of presenting a lot of board control as the game goes on. The deck is kind of like this mid-rangey stacks deck. It doesn't like pivot really hard into stacks, but it has a number of very impactful pieces. So it has Collector Oof, Dranith, Douthie, Thalia, Archon of Emeria, Ranger Captain, Opposition Agent, Aven Mind Sensor, and Lenvala. So definitely not like the heaviest on stacks, but enough that in an Abzan shell you are still able to play a lot of really impactful pieces to lock your opponents out. And a lot of this deck is really just ways to get either Protean Hulk in the graveyard, to reanimate it with things like Survival and Dance of the Dead or Necromancy, Pattern of Rebirth, obviously the target when you sacrifice an Academy Rector, so you sacrifice the Academy Rector, then you go get a Pattern of Rebirth, then you sacrifice the Pattern of Rebirth, that puts your Protean Hulk in, etc., etc. I mean, it's a pretty classic Abzan Hulk list, just given the fact that, you know, it's got a lot of solid layering. I really like the use of the Karmic Guide piles in this deck as opposed to the like lesser Masticore piles that are in the more Golgari based deck. I've always been a bigger fan of these Karmic Guide piles, so very happy to see that pile here. As I said, I was actually working on optimizing this deck with Gustav literally a week ago, so it's pretty cool to see him not only take this deck out after we had just talked about it, but also to see him put up a top 4 performance with it. So this is pretty awesome. But yeah, Abzan and Hulk in general, there was actually in this top 16, there were 3 separate Hulk decks, all with the ability to play Academy Rector. So clearly a strategy that is at least doing pretty well right now. Apparently there weren't a bunch of Hulk decks in the field, but the fact that all 3 of them, or 3 out of a set number of them, were able to make the top 16, I think really indicates how well that deck is positioned at the current moment. I'm a huge Hulk fan, so this might be being a little biased and based on the results here, but yeah, anytime that people are saying let's play some Protean Hulk, I'm pretty down. Next, we have Anemone with Jesska, Timna, Mardu Farm. So this is a pretty classic Mad Farm list. This one is going and actually still playing the World Gorger Dragon loops. For those who don't know, World Gorger Dragon and an effect like Dance of the Dead, Animate Dead, or Necromancy basically happens and creates a loop where you are flickering all your permanents over and over again because Animate Dead and Dance the Dead and Necromancy sacrifice when they're removed from the battlefield. World Gorger comes in, and they basically create this contradiction where you're flickering all your permanents, making infinite mana, and using your commander, Jesska, as an infinite mana outlet. This deck is also playing the infinite mana combo of Auriok Salvagers and Lion's Eye Diamond. Basically, how that works is you crack Lion's Eye Diamond for 3 white, bring it back with the Salvager's activated ability, you play it again, do the exact same thing. So you have to discard your hand, which is definitely a big downside. But what ends up happening is it creates infinite mana, and after you make infinite white mana, then you channel it obviously into the infinite mana of all the other colors, and then you play, once again, Jesska infinite times from your command zone, nuke your opponents. And then the rest of this deck is mid-range-ish Turbo Nas deck. So you have Peer into the Abyss, you have Ad Nauseam itself. I mean, it's technically a farm list too, but the idea is that you just play a bunch of little dorky creatures like Dragon Race Channeler, Esper Sentinel, Hobagirper, Insolent Neonate, Ragavan, Saracen, Thieves Guild Enforcer, all dorky little 1-drops that draw you cards with Timna. You're accruing value the whole time. You're occasionally playing some impactful pieces like Douthie or Opposition Agent, and you're trying to go quick. You have sort of this mid-range pivot, but you have a bunch of infinite mana combos that allow you to just pop off really efficiently at any time. And Jesska obviously provides you this really clean outlet in the command zone for when you make infinite mana. So you don't even really need to like have an Ad Nauseam pop off to be able to like actually win the game. Whereas a lot of other farm variants don't have such a clean outlet in the command zone, especially ones that do not have blue and black and aren't able to use the Thoracle Consult combo. But yeah, the deck is quick, very proactive. You're playing a bunch of dorky creatures that really want to put pressure on their opponents. Oh, it's also actually playing Dual Caster Twin Flame in the combos. If you Twin Flame a creature and then respond with Dual Caster, it makes infinite copies of Dual Caster Mage. So a lot of win conditions in this deck. So there's Magda here. Are they also playing Bolas's Citadel? They're not. Oh, they're playing Magda Cloudstone Curio. So yet another infinite mana combo. You play Dockside, you play Magda. Magda allows you to go get the Cloudstone Curio, and then you're able to play a creature, bounce Dockside back to your hand, play Dockside again, make treasures. It's a little tough because for Dockside Magda to just win the game, you need at least 8 mana if you have a 1-drop in hand. If you don't have a 1-drop and you don't have another creature, I've never just been a big fan of the Magda fetching Curio in these decks, especially when you don't have another thing to get, like a Bolas's Citadel. But Magda just works decently enough with Timna that I guess it kind of fits the strategy. There's a lot of infinite mana combos in this deck. So clearly an enemy very much favors the ability to have a bunch of layered combos. But the fact that there's World Gorger, Auriok, Magda, Dockside, Dualcaster, all as infinite mana creators or infinite creature creators, and then also is playing like the Turbo Nas plan, and I'm pretty sure is on Underworld Breach as well with Grinding Station. So yet another combo. I guess that one technically doesn't just win the game outright as opposed to the other ones, but still, there's a lot of combos in this deck, which doesn't leave a lot as far as like interaction with the table and things like that. There's just Silence and Swords and Red Blast and Swat. Oh, and Damn, here we go. This deck's really just going forward and hoping your opponents don't do a lot. There's Douthie, which is a thing. Catharic Mana blows up artifacts and enchantments. Ranger Captain's obviously very good, and so is Grim Hireling. Ranger Captain can be proactive or reactive, and Skyclave can also remove stuff. So there's definitely answers in this deck, but there's definitely not a lot, and this deck's clearly just trying to do its own thing and do it very, very fast. Pretty standard Mardu farm list, but congrats to an enemy on making the top 4 with this deck. So we have Temur Pirates by Vasher. For those who don't know, Temur Pirates is basically built around the idea that Malcolm and Glinthorn Buccaneer are a 2-card combo that wins the game. If you go to combat and discard a card with Buccaneer, you create a loop where you ping all of your opponents, make 3 treasures, use Buccaneer's activated ability, discard a card, do the loop again, and you keep drawing and discarding cards from your deck, and you ping your opponents to death and make a reasonable amount of mana. This is a very classic list. I know Vasher has been playing a lot of this deck. I know he and Zane, who also is just a frequent performer on this deck, have played a good amount of it, and I know they talk to each other about this deck, or at least did in the past. But the reason to play Tana paired with Malcolm is, one, you need the red to be able to play Glinthorn, but the green is to give you access to all of the ridiculous amount of tutors that green allows you to for getting another creature on the battlefield. You have Finale Devastation, you have Neoform, you have Eldritch Evolution, I believe you have Worldly Tutor, you have Chord of Calling. So a lot of different ways to be able to go and grab your Glinthorn. You have Birthing Pod, you have Survival of the Fittest, and that's just the green, get them right out in the battlefield things, whereas opposed to, there's also a bunch of other stuff here that will also go grab you your Glinthorn. You have things like Imperial Recruiter, you have Gamble. There's a lot of ways to go get that Glinthorn and get it onto the battlefield. I'm noticing here some weird cards. Trickery Charm. Oh, so are they playing? Oh, okay. Vasher's playing 2 of the creature type hack effects, which is basically these allow you to change the text of a creature from one creature type to a different creature type. I usually don't see these as tech options in this deck, but basically that's why Reckless Fireweaver is in here, because what'll happen is if you change Reckless Fireweaver into a pirate, whenever an artifact enters the battlefield, the Reckless Fireweaver, which is now a pirate, will deal 1 damage to each of your opponents. Then Malcolm will trigger, making 3 more treasures. Reckless Fireweaver sees that 3 treasures enter the battlefield, pings all your opponents. And the reason this works is because you then change him to a pirate, and Malcolm only triggers off pirates. So I usually don't see that combo frequently used, especially in the Temur version. I've seen it used a lot in the more red-blue Malcolm decks, so I'm very interested to see the Reckless Fireweaver combo being used here in this Temur variant. Some newer tech, obviously Professional Facebreaker, super solid when your commander is making treasures every time a pirate connects. Facebreaker is just a dumb card, I love it. A lot of sort of mid-rangey, beefy creature options here, kind of like the benefit of playing the green version is you get to ramp out into these pieces. Niv also combos off with Tandem Lookout and Curiosity, which you're already kind of playing in this deck anyways. 1, because it's really effective with Malcolm, draws you a bunch of cards, and then 2, because those cards by themselves are also layered combos with Glinthorn Buccaneer. So if Malcolm dies a bunch, you can just slap a Curiosity on a Glinthorn, hit your opponents, and as long as you have 8 cards at the end step, you can go to the cleanup loop where you will go to discard a card. Glinthorn sees you discard a card, you deal damage to your opponents, you draw a card, then you need to start a new cleanup because you have more than 8 cards in hand, etc., etc. So that's pretty cool. I'm interested by a lot of the tech options in this deck, but Temur Pirates is and has been one of the best decks in the format for a while and continues to consistently put up results. It's one of those decks that people forget to respect, and then it does really well. Z-Rob has been stealing tournaments with this deck for probably over about a year now and put up just like ridiculous results with it. So seeing Vasher do very well with this deck is not a surprise. It's a very solid deck and very happy to see it do well here. And our number one placing deck, our winner for this tournament, was also an Abzan Protean Hulk list. This is Timna and Kodama, Hulk of the East Weavers by Legit Vocals. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a little over a year now, that name will be very familiar to you. Legit Vocals went on an absolute spree last year of top fours for all of the tier 1 con qualifiers. Legit playing this deck made, I want to say, at least 2, maybe 3 separate top 4 performances with this deck. So first of all, happy to see Legit take the entire win here with this deck. And there's not going to be a lot of new stuff to say here, although noticing right away, one of the main differences between his list and Gustav's list is that he is opting to go for the Disciple of the Vault, Lesser Masticore, and Malira Protean Hulk pile, as opposed to the Karmic Guide one that I was describing when I was going over Gustav's list. It definitely requires you to pull Protean Hulk out of the graveyard a lot less than the pile I was describing that Gustav was playing, but it also means that you're playing just arguably bad cards. So Malira, Lesser Masticore, and Disciple of the Vault are all pretty just like not great in general. So that's been kind of a debate in the Abzan space about which pile you want to be playing. And I believe this pile technically takes up more slots in your deck, although I could be proven otherwise on that one. I don't know that for certainty, but I believe that is some of the thinking. And then they also have Zulaport Cutthroat as an outlet in the deck too, and I guess that's just in case something happens to your Disciple of the Vault. This list is also, very interestingly, playing some wild cards. First of all, this deck is on Razaketh and has independent Razaketh lines because Lions of Diamonds in here for these Razaketh lines. The cool thing about Razaketh is, well, actually there's a bunch of really cool things about Razaketh, but Razaketh, the combo you kind of go for when you're going for the Razaketh thing is Leonin Relic Order, and Leonin Relic Order with an effect like Necromancy or Animate Dead or Dance of the Dead, and an outlet card that basically says whenever something dies, i.e. the Zulaport Cutthroat here, that each opponent loses 1 life. So Leonin will come in if it's reanimated with one of these cards. So say you use Animate Dead to bring it back to the battlefield, Leonin will come in, you exile your own Animate Dead, it will trigger sacrificing the Leonin Relic Order. But then Animate Dead comes back, it says, okay, what do you want to reanimate? You reanimate the Leonin Relic Order. So this is an infinite ETB and death loop, and then Zulaport obviously makes it so that every time you're going through that loop, your opponents are losing 1 life. This deck is also playing Opposition Agent and Marilyn as a backup Protean Hulk pile, and basically what that says is Oppo stops your opponent from searching, you take over their search, and then you take the card, and then Marilyn forces your opponents to search every turn and makes it so they can't draw cards. So what'll happen is your opponents can't draw, they keep losing 3 life, and you can just steal cards out of their deck until you have enough cards to go for a win. Definitely a less effective pile than the ones that just sort of kill your opponent immediately, but it's worth noting here. Playing Wandering Archaic, there's a lot of thick creatures in this deck for sure. Also noting that Luris and Eternal Witness are both being played, which are both pieces for when you're assembling Razaketh piles. I can go more into detail sometime about the Razaketh piles, but they're very complicated to the point where I am aware of them and I generally get how they work, but going through them is a giant pain in the butt. This deck's also on Loyal Retainers, which as far as I can see only really gets Razaketh from the graveyard. Yes, there are other cards it gets like Luris and Marilyn, but and Malira, I guess, but those are not targets you want to be playing. One of the really cool things about Razaketh in this deck specifically is that if Kodama is on the battlefield, you can win the game by reanimating Razaketh and not casting any other spells. So what happens is you have Kodama on the battlefield, you reanimate Razaketh by any number of means possible. So either through your Animate Dead, your Dance of the Dead, your Necromancy, your Loyal Retainers over here. You should get Razaketh back on, or you can hard cast Razaketh, but I mean, you're more likely going to be reanimating this card just because, you know, 8 mana is a lot. And when Razaketh hits the battlefield, you'll generate a Kodama trigger. So what you do is with the Kodama trigger on the stack, the Kodama trigger says you can put any permanent with converted mana cost 8 or less onto the battlefield because Razaketh just entered. So you actually sacrifice your Kodama to Razaketh's ability and you go put your Protean Hulk into your hand. Now, you do that in response to the Kodama trigger so that when the Kodama trigger resolves, you put your Protean Hulk onto the battlefield. At that point, you have Razaketh and Protean Hulk, and Razaketh becomes your sack outlet for the Protean Hulk loop. Now, obviously, when you are going through the Protean Hulk loop, you do not want to rely on Razaketh to be your sack outlet. You want to go get one of your other sack outlets, being either Carrion Feeder or Viscera Seer, because Protean Hulk and Razaketh, you would be paying 2 life every single time. So you don't want to rely on Razaketh as your only sack outlet. But yeah, apart from that, it is another just kind of classic Abzan Protean Hulk thing. It has the Academy Rector lines that we were talking about earlier, a bunch of different ways to either entomb or reanimate these cards. The fact that you have Razaketh and Protean Hulk as sort of these layered reanimations. There's a lot of cool stuff in this deck. Dark Privilege is really interesting. It's a sack outlet that's an enchantment. I've never been a big fan of this one, but I know Legit kind of swears by this. Smuggler's Share is the first time I've actually seen it in a performing cEDH list as of yet. I'm definitely interested to hear how that performed in the deck for sure. Apart from that, yeah, it's a regular Abzan-y Protean Hulk list. This one you'll also notice is a lot lighter on stack. We have Oof, we have Magistrate, and that's it for creatures. This list is very proactive, right? It's just trying to do its own thing. Null Rod as more stacks, and Deafening Silence and Blind Obedience. But that's it for the stacks in this deck. So that's very light on stacks. This deck really, I feel like, tries to capitalize upon getting your Kodama out and then just doing your thing as quickly as possible, really just trying to outvalue the other decks of the table. You know, they're obviously Oof, Null Rod, and Deafening Silence are extremely impactful against different Turbo ad nauseam decks, but it's worth noting that, you know, that's not a lot of interaction for what's happening in the game. So clearly this deck is just doing its own thing and kind of operating on the axis of your opponent's have to stop you or else you just win this game. And clearly, after several rounds of Swiss and the top 16 and the top 4, the opponents failed to do that. So Timna Kodama, piloted by Legit Vocals, Hulk of the East Weavers, back after a hiatus from last year's Tier 1 Con qualifiers. Congrats to Legit on taking down this tournament. So thank you for watching this. There's going to be more of these Ka0s of the Nexus tournaments. It's a series that's going to keep going. I'm going to put down in the description of this video the top 16 deck lists. So it'll be one link that has all the top 16 pages. I highly suggest following the Ka0s on the Nexus Moxfield page because that will show all the deck lists from their tournaments. Big shout out to Ka0s and the cEDH Nexus for hosting these tournaments. It's really exciting to have more tournaments out in the wild and very exciting stuff here. If you like this breakdown, make sure to hit like and subscribe. And if you're feeling extra generous, check out that Patreon at patreon.com/comedianmtg. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching this top 4 breakdown. I hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. And I'll catch you guys next time. Peace.